My name is Marvin Johnson, and this year, since we've had the switch over to Purdue University, my job title is lecturer slash lab manager. But I've been lab manager for, about 7 years now, maybe a little bit longer than that, because I was offered a full-time position as lab technician back in 2015. And then, of course, after we changed to the ACC accreditation, then I was actually teaching as a lab technician. So then, when we switched over to Purdue, then that title became lecturer slash lab manager. So, but working with the Purdue University, it's a little bit different than what we were doing with IUPUI, but the curriculum has always been Purdue University. It's always been either construction engineering and technology, or as it is now, construction management. So I like the program. I graduated from the program in 1971, and I've been in the industry before I started teaching. So I had worked in the industry probably over 35 years before I went into teaching, thinking, what would I do if I wanted to retire? So I looked into it and thought that I was just going to kind of do a little research, talk to the program director at the time, and he looked at my credentials and said, well, what would you do if you had to teach this course? And he showed me a textbook. And I said, well, the good thing about the book, it's a good reference, but I said, it's a lot of information for a freshman student. And he said, well, what would you change? I said, well, I just changed the sequence of the way I teach the chapters. And he said, well, no one's ever said anything like that before. And so he said, well, why would you do that? I said, well, I would teach the chapters in the steps that the buildings are built, rather than go from chapter 1 to chapter 35 just because that's the way it's in the book. He said, what are you doing in January? I said, well, I'll probably still be doing my self-employment. He said, I've got an opening for you. So my research into retirement started pretty early. When he gave me the question, I couldn't turn it down. So I started part-time in 2008 and then started full-time in 2015. As I mentioned, I graduated in '71 from Purdue University under the construction technology program, and immediately went into construction. There were no internship requirements at the time. We were taking more credits, so we really didn't have time. But I went into construction, started working with smaller construction companies, family-owned businesses. So I had to learn a lot. I had to really deal with family issues, business issues, social issues. But I was out there, I was in the field. I mean, my profession coming out of college was cost estimator. And my theory was, if I was a good cost estimator, I would be a better project manager. And so they did interviews, told me that they would hire me, and wanted me to stop, in fact, discontinue my school prior to my last semester. So imagine going through an interview in December, and then they're saying, well, just come to work. We'll pay your tuition for your last semester. And I almost did it. I almost dropped out working, thinking, oh, I'm ready to go, I'm ready to get into it. I stayed in school, graduated, contacted the company that interviewed me in December. They still had the job opening. So I didn't have to miss a semester. I was able to graduate. So I worked with a couple of general contracting companies after that, probably for about 4 years. Then I went to work for the state of Indiana. They had a program that was funded under the Department of Commerce. That department, its mission was to provide technical assistance to small construction companies throughout the state of Indiana, free of charge. We would provide technical assistance in estimating, scheduling, get these small businesses on their feet. And I became manager of technical assistance statewide. So after that, we opened up an office in Gary, Indiana, opened up a second office in Evansville, So I was managing 3 offices: Gary, Indianapolis, and Evansville. So after that, it lasted 4 years. Of course, when you come up with a new governor, then some things change, politics change. So I decided I was ready to go on my own. I put a company together with a couple of investors. I was president, project manager. We did commercial projects. Did that for about 4 years and decided it's time for me to go on my own in consulting. So I started my own consulting business in 1983 and been consulting ever since. In dealing with clients, you have to learn how to listen, because everything that they say is not necessarily a complaint as it is, can you help me? And then I'll complain. It's one of those things where, I need help, but I've been able to get by this far. I just need you to help me get to the next step. So listening became a very good tool for me, because I was used to doing that. Even when I was running other businesses, doing estimating before, you have to listen to people. I had to work with other people in order to put estimates together and proposals and things of that nature. So working with clients, it was a teaching, it was an exchange, because I'm listening to them, they're listening to me. They're reluctant about making changes, but they know they need to make changes. So you have to work with them very patiently. But when you give them an hourly rate, they don't take too long to make a few things, make a few changes, make a few decisions. But that's what led me to think I might be good for teaching, because I have been working with clients for so long. I'd probably, when you look at 35 plus years in construction and dealing and communicating with people, you have a tendency to say, well, why don't I take that to another level? What could I do with students? And that's how I got curious about teaching. If we don't connect the student to what's going on in the field, the book knowledge is not enough. When I was working in the field, I ran across students who had graduated from schools, different programs in construction, and you could pretty much tell the students weren't really prepared. They didn't have the field experience, so that they couldn't communicate with engineers, couldn't communicate with architects, had a hard time communicating with owners, okay? And so that lack of confidence really created a barrier for them to communicate with others in the same industry. So it's almost mandatory that if you're going to have a program and you're preparing students for employment, they need to touch that industry before they leave school. It's essential. It's very critical, because one thing that I learned in working in the field was communication. Because if I didn't understand what the client needed, it was hard to understand how the changes needed to be made in order to get them to the next level. The students are the same way, because if you don't work with them and work at that level, they're not going to be prepared for employment. So one of the things that we were able to do working with the program was working with industry through what was the Industry Advisory Board. A group of contractors, engineers, architects, bankers, real estate individuals, expertise, in their field, coming together and saying, we need this from our students. We need students to have the basics in this. We need students that understand communications. We need students with more confidence. Well, if you don't listen to the industry, you're not doing the students any good at all. So by listening to the students, listening to the industry, you match them up with the basic requirements that they need, and then you tell them, okay, we've got the students, do you have the opportunities? Because if we prepare the students for internship or part-time positions, you've got to take them in. You've got to let them know the opportunities are there so that they don't feel like they're wasting their time. That cooperation from the industry was key. That was, it was like just saying, okay, let's just clear all the obstacles out of the way. We can take care of the book learning, but you've got to be able to accept them once we get to that point.
Right.
And that's what really made this program successful. It's one of the better areas as a geographic location within the state. Being in a university environment and then able to go and work part-time it kind of mingles the environments together. It mingles the campus life with the industry, and you've got some students that are already in a family position. So part-time work is critical for them in order to get into the program to begin with. So if you come in and say, well, you're accepted into the program, we're going to teach you this, we're going to teach you that, and then we promise you a position in 4 years, that's good. But if they're already in a family situation, they already have responsibilities. So the environment is perfect. Now, the atmosphere, the construction atmosphere, is something going on all the time because this is the capital of the state. This is what they call the crossroads. So obviously you got a lot of things going on here that are somewhat politically driven, but there's other things that are created and required because of infrastructure. The upgrades are critical. Electrical, highway, building structures, everything has a transitional period that we've been going through for the last 50 years. Some people don't realize it. They think, well, all of a sudden now we've got new politics, so there's new money. This money has been in this area for years, and upgrades have been taking place. So it makes it good for the student as it relates to being able to work, but you got to let them know where the opportunities are because they don't always see it. They think, well, if I'm going to go out of college, I'm going to end up working for a general contractor. Maybe. But there are subcontractors who do 80% of the work, almost on every project. So when you look at the subs, the vendors, the fabricators, the designers, the engineers, they may be in the background, but the success in those fields is just as critical, and it's available. There's a certain requirement that is hidden within the industry that many students don't see, and that is they understand the work in the field, not necessarily experiencing the work, but seeing it visually. They observe crews working on buildings, or they observe crews working on highways. But then they make a decision, well, I don't want to be in the field. I don't want to be on highways. I want to be in the office. I want to manage the project. No idea what that requires. So you have to kind of steer them in a direction based on where they would like to go. But you also have to look at their academic experience. You have to look at their ability to do the math that's required, or do the science that's required, or the communications that's required, and kind of steer them, well, what do you think about this? Well, what do you think about that? And if you can get them to do a little research to find out what they really need. I tell students, if you can't find something that you can work at 10 hours a day and enjoy it when you go home, you may not be there yet. Okay? Because I try to get them to understand it's not going after the money. Construction is not going after money because, first of all, it's not that good on the pay scale compared to some other specialties. Computers, cybersecurity, those are high paid because they're highly technical environments. But they like construction. Either the family was involved, they did a little part-time in the summer, grandfather owned the company and they may be talked to about ownership, that type of thing, but very little field experience. I've had students come in with no experience at all and say, well, I want to be a manager. Well, what about the trades? That's for the field work. I'd rather be in the office. Okay, you can't say that they're wrong, but you have to be able to understand where they're coming from and where they got the influence and say, okay, how about this? How about that? So the educational beginning or the educational start is a good place to expose them to different things. You just have to let them know, well, this is what a contract negotiator would do, or this is what an engineer would do, or this is what an architect would do. This is what a carpenter would do, and let them know that each area is an attractive area, but they have to like it. You have to get them to like it. If they don't like it, encourage them to look into something else. And I think that's where the education comes in, but the industry as a whole doesn't really require a lot of degrees to work. They want experience. They want students that can think on their feet, that can go through some of the estimating and the scheduling, be able to work with superintendents, even if you're a manager. A lot of students look at a project manager and they see a superintendent as just somebody who works in the field. Well, if you don't help a student connect the two, they don't see the importance of the communication between the two. So you have to pretty much take this program, and the advantage that we have is it brings the students to us. Okay, we let career services and student retention, we let them take care of that. Bring the students into the construction program, and if they get this far, we can pretty much take care of the rest of the student. Okay, we can influence them enough to hopefully, keep them in the industry. Now, on the other side, you always have students that may get into mechanical engineering, they get into computer engineering. I even had one student that was a degreed student in criminology, ended up in one of my freshman classes, and I said, "What are you doing here?" He said, "I graduated, but in my last semester, I didn't think criminology was where I wanted to be, so I enrolled in the construction program." I said, "Well, why construction? Why not mechanical? Why not computer?" Well, I just like building things. I just like the idea that once I build it, I can see it. I can tell my cousins, my family that I did that. I said, "Okay, but you have no construction experience." "Well, that's okay. I didn't have any legal experience either." So we're dealing with those kind of issues. And so I always tell the recruiters, get them in here and we'll help them if we can. That student ended up getting a construction management degree. He got his bachelor's degree. He contacted me a couple of years after he graduated. He said, "Professor Johnson, I don't know if you remember me." And I said, "Yes." He gave me his name. I said, "Yeah, I remember you." He said, "I went into construction. I took your advice. Now I am a contract negotiator." I said, "How's everything going?" He said, "I'm pretty much naming my own ticket." I said, "Great." So, it's those kind of communications that we have to establish. We have to use what we have in order to enhance the students' ability to see where they want to go. And if we can help them see where they want to go, and say, "Okay, here's what's required. Here's what you got to study," then that's pretty much the name of the game. We have to do that. Mm-hmm. It's part of the reason why I did capstone the way I do. I know some students may talk about capstone. I had a different approach about it, and so it was just something of taking my field experience and then putting it into the classroom for hands-on experiential learning. And I think it's been fairly successful. But it was a broad step, for the program. They weren't used to what I was presenting, and I had to submit a proposal on the schedule and the assignments. And they said, "Wait a minute, your capstone involves all the courses that the students have already taken." I said, "Well, let this be their last test before they go out into the employment world. And if they can make my capstone," I said, "they can make it outside." So it was an experiment when I started this in the fall of 2014. Yeah. I was teaching project management, and I was teaching it as a part-time instructor, once I started. And it was a textbook format, okay? Lecture, quiz, midterm, final exam, and the students were bored. It was the senior course, and they were bored, and because the subject matter was so much a repeat of other courses that they were already taking. So to come in my project management course and listen to me talk about the same thing was rather boring. It was boring for them, boring for me. So I presented a capstone concept to the program director, and he said, but you want to do this in the fall?" I said, "Well, sure." "Well, we don't do capstone in the fall." I said, "Why not?" "Well, we only do it in the spring." I said, "Okay, then why not the fall?" "Well, we don't do it in the fall." I said, "Okay, what about the students who graduate in December?" "Well, if they want capstone, they got to take it in the spring." I said, "Okay." I said, "What if I tried this in the fall?" I said, "Would you support me if it works?" He said, "Yeah, but you're next going to be out there." I said, I'll give it a shot." So I tried my project management, and I converted it to a capstone project. and I did it for the fall of 2014. I've been doing capstone ever since. Fall and spring.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
If I don't do capstone in the fall, then I get in trouble. It's just like, what do you mean you can't do it in the fall? But it was the exponential. It was that experimental startup of taking those courses and incorporating it into a real project that has been built in the field. They use documents, construction documents that I get from contractors, from projects that they built. And so I do a local selection on those projects so that I can take the students to the project and we do an inspection, we do a walkthrough. So if they're preparing proposals and contracts and doing their presentation, they have to do a presentation in front of the Contractors Advisory Council. They have to pretend like they are a construction company, work as a team right from day one in the semester, do a presentation from memory. They can't use notes. They have to use their PowerPoint presentation. And they have to actually go after a contract. So they go through that experience and I do it in the fall and the spring. I may use a different project in the fall than the ones I use in the spring. It kind of depends because a lot of times you'll have students that will exchange information. They graduate and then they say, oh, by the way, here's what we did. But when I get to the new semester, it's probably a different project. So the information is different. Just kind of change it up. Keep the students from being so predictable, about what we're going to do. But capstone to me is my way of showing them, here's what you need to do in order to be ready for the field. Now, as far as the contractors who are hiring them, Marvin, do you have any more? We need more students. We need more students. Because evidently, it's addressing a need that they see they're getting out of the program. So we're going to keep on as long as we can. But it's a way to keep the industry, the school, all tied together with the kind of the students in between. You got the school with its demands, you got the industry with its demands, and you got students moving through that process. So we have to have a way to make sure that they can relate to that. So we're doing pretty good. I think we're about a 99% employment. So every student has a job when they leave here.
That's amazing.
And we feel like we really have to do that because it's not fair to send a student out here not prepared for industry, and the industry is telling us what they need. Well, go ahead and match it. That's the way I see it. I think that's what my experience brings to the table. I know what's required.
Yeah.
I've done it. It's not like I'm studying out of a textbook. I've actually done it.
Yeah.
So now they can do it. How do I feel about teaching? I enjoy it. I enjoy the relationship I have with students. They're apprehensive when they come into any program, any new course. It's like if they've met an instructor for the first time, there's always this reluctance. And you can tell it's there because most of the students sit in the back row. So to get acquainted, you got to get them to be comfortable. One of the things that I do when I start capstone especially, now I do also lab testing. I do materials testing, and I was mentioning earlier about the things that we do. That's a hands-on, but it's part of a lecture course that's given earlier in the week. And I only do a lab test based on the lecture topic. But anyway, on the capstone program, I enjoy communicating with students and identifying their level of expertise. Students come into the senior program with some experience, some expertise, and I just simply take advantage of that. And I like learning from students because I'm hopeful that they can learn from me because I already know that I've had experiences that they haven't had yet. But you don't just throw a whole lot of information. You don't overwhelm them with experience. Well, I did this and I did that and I did that. It's not about so much what I did. It's using that as a tool to get the student to understand the requirements of the industry. Yes, you can do it, but here's what you have to do to be prepared for it. And that's pretty much where my somewhat mission is. I just simply enjoy preparing students for that opportunity. Every industry has a process, and the process to develop leadership starts at the bottom. Okay, any owner of a company is going to want a student to come in with certain academic basics, but they actually want those students to take a leadership role. They just can't give it all at once. So what I tell the parents is that if we can take the experience that they already have, or even if they don't have it, if they're interested, the students have to be willing to work. But then I ask the parents, will you support the students while they're going through the program? And it puts the parents on the spot. You know, well, wait a minute, I thought that's what the school was for. Yes, but we're going to have the students go through certain programs, certain hands-on applications, certain experiences, and we'd like for the parents to encourage them to at least try it. If you can encourage them to try it, then we can take them to the next step. Because a lot of times parents don't understand the decisions that their students are making. They only see the results based on either a grade or graduating or going to the next course. And they hear the students come in, oh, I got all this homework to do and I got so much work, and this one professor just loading us up. Well, I don't know what he's thinking about. He's just giving us so much work to do. Well, if the parents is not supporting the program, the student is looking towards the parents for a way out. I tell parents, don't give them a way out, just encourage them to take a little bit at a time. And if they have any questions, go back to the instructor, say, look, I need to go over this a little bit more, or there's a couple of things I don't understand. And once the communication between the student and the instructor is a solid communication process, students don't have any problem. But that way, the parents can see an improvement. They can see an attitude adjustment. And once they start to see an attitude adjustment, they can say, oh, well, maybe my child is set for this industry, or maybe he is going to make it into leadership. But they got to be willing to start at the bottom. They got to start where the basics are, because most of the industries, every industry is looking for leadership, because the seniors are the ones who are ready to retire. And they cannot retire until there's someone to take their place. So again, we listen to industry, we listen to the students, and then we try to explain to the parents as well what the students are going to have to do. And if the parents understand the work that they're going to have to put in as a student, then we ask the parents, just simply encourage them. They're going to come in, they're going to complain about homework, they're going to complain about the exam. Just let them know that once they've done this program, they're pretty much ready for leadership and management. One of the things that we also tell students, every position that you work is a management position. Because I approach students, you're a project manager. I don't care what your title is, you are a project manager over a certain amount of responsibilities. So take it home, let your parents know that whatever you're doing with a project with them, you're a project manager. Because you're responsible to get it done on time, and don't spend any money. So as a project manager, you got a start and a finish. So I let the parents know, that kind of relationship is what it's going to take to get them to be leaders, because the confidence is built. They begin to absorb what they're learning, so they retain that, take it to the next level, and just keep right on going. I have several projects around the town, especially because most of my activity was local here in Indianapolis. But as a youngster coming up in the industry, there's several churches that I was involved in as a carpenter. I was trained as a carpenter from my father, and so I worked on several projects. Then as I got older and got into the state position, it wasn't so much the projects that we were involved in as it was just overall construction industry. Now, after I became my own consultant, I did several projects in town. I did phase 2 of the canal project. One of my first projects that I did going into business was the Madam Walker Urban Life Center, the Walker building. At the time, 1983, the building had been vacant for almost 25 years. And there were a few people going in trying to make sure, the lights were on, and every once in a while, a few things. They actually wanted to start putting offices in that building, and they hired me. So I've done projects of that nature. Like I said, the canal project was one. I did work with different clients. We did a large Walmart project in Plainfield. And we had a proposal coming from IPS, Indianapolis Public Schools. They saw what I was doing. Of course, I didn't think anything about it because they were putting their package together. They came out with a package, 26 schools, $160 million worth of work. We did some work on the city-county building, in consulting in different areas. I worked as a consultant. I had a couple of my clients that worked on the Lucas Oil building, on the stadium, either worked as concrete suppliers, subcontractors, different things that they were doing, and everybody said, Marvin, we got to have good contractors. We got to have successful contractors. And so I would work with the contractors to put their bid together, but then I would work for the city or the state to make sure they had compliance. so I was working and I was busy.
Yeah.
I was busy. But a lot of a lot of those particular projects are still running. Lucas Oil is still running. And a couple of projects around town. I've done a couple of multifamily projects. When I was in business, we did work around what was used to be the old Fort Harrison, and used to be a military base when I was working out there. So we've been around a little bit.